Now, validity has multiple types as well. We have internal and external validity, just like we do reliability. Internal validity is when we're saying that the tool is measuring what we mean for it to measure. And it also means that we have controlled any confounding, extraneous, external variables, whatever you would like to call those. We're going to talk about them later in the threats to reliability and validity section. Different types of internal validity include face validity, concurrent or convergent validity, and predictive validity. We also have what's called external validity, which that just means generalizability. It means, do our findings that we found in the laboratory or with our sample, do they actually apply to the real world? Just like we talked about with that driving test when I asked whether it's valid, I was asking about external validity. Is the test similar enough to driving conditions so that if you do well on the driving test, it means you're a good driver in the real world? That, if that were true, that would be high external validity for the test. Let's start though with our internal validity types. Face validity means, does our measurement tool just kind of look like it's measuring what we want it to on its face? If we went back to our cake survey example, y'all notice the reliability problem, and it would also give us a validity problem where our test was measuring more about desserts in general and not just about cake, right? So our measurement tool looked like, just from the wording of the questions, that it wasn't exactly measuring what I had intended it to measure. Here's another example. If I'm trying to write a good survey item to ask students about their GPA, let's look at a couple examples and see which one seems more face valid. We can ask them, do you get mostly A's, B's, or C's in your classes? Or we can ask them, what is your GPA on a 4.0 scale? Now remember, validity means accuracy. So which one of these questions do you think will give us a more accurate result? So you can pause the video. I'll wait for a minute. I'll be right here waiting for you. That's right. The second one, what is your GPA on a 4.0 scale, would be the more face valid one. Now, we haven't done any tests to get any kind of number of validity or anything like that, but face validity just means, with your best judgment, does it look like it makes sense? We also have what's called concurrent validity, and this means, does the measurement tool that we are using, our questionnaire, our rating form for our raters to look at, whatever it is we're using, does it correlate with other related measures that would make sense for them to be correlated with? If I were creating a happiness questionnaire, I would want to give participants that happiness questionnaire and a bunch of other questionnaires like life satisfaction and depression and anxiety and quality of life and a bunch of other stuff. And I would want to see in my results that my happiness measure would be correlated with my life satisfaction measure, because it just makes sense according to our expectations that if you're happy, you're probably also satisfied with conditions in your life and vice versa. So we would expect a positive correlation there. So if we found that, our happiness questionnaire that we created would have good concurrent validity. If, on the other hand, our happiness people who took our happiness questionnaire and rated high happiness on it were also endorsing high levels of depression on another questionnaire, that would raise some red flags. That would show us we probably don't have good concurrent validity, because we would not expect depressed people to be very happy. So that means our happiness measure probably not very good. We also have what's called, it's the flip side of concurrent validity, which is called divergent validity. And that means that we would expect people who rated my happiness questionnaire really high, they're very happy according to this measure, we would expect them to have low levels of depression on the depression questionnaire. So we would expect a negative correlation between those two. I would want to see that those questionnaires are not positively correlated with each other, that they're not related. And that would just make sense according to our understanding of happiness and depression, right? So divergent validity, it's just the flip side of concurrent validity. Concurrent validity is where concepts that should be related to each other, our questionnaires that measure those are correlated with each other. Divergent validity means concepts that we would expect to be the opposite. We show that with our questionnaires. Our questionnaires would show a negative association between them. Predictive validity is very similar, and it's the final one we're going to talk about in terms of internal validity. Predictive validity means, how good is this measure at predicting a related construct that would happen in the future? Dr. Hayes, one of our professors here at UT Tyler, likes to ask children questions about what jobs they want to have when they grow up. these are called occupational aspirations, right? Children's occupational aspirations usually are not great predictors of what they actually are going to be when they grow up, right? Measures of occupational aspirations in children have low predictive validity for their actual occupations when they grow up. Another important question is, are SAT scores, or insert college admission test here, very predictive of college achievement? And actually, it turns out they are not, which is why some programs, some graduate programs, don't ask you to take a standardized test to get in anymore. And some colleges are rethinking their idea of admission tests because SATs tend to predict your GPA in your first year of college a little bit, but beyond that, they don't predict your success in college overall or your success in some kind of career later on. So SATs only have kind of meh predictive validity. And now for external validity, we are concerned with whether our measurements are generalizable to other contexts. Would my measure yield findings that are accurate and good for people who were not in the sample in my study? So if we created that happiness measure I was talking about before for children in East Texas, would this generalize to older adults in Southeast Asia? Probably not. So it would have low external validity. Internal and external validity, by the way, are always at odds with each other. If you increase the internal validity of a study by controlling a whole bunch of variables in your laboratory or survey study or whatever, what you're going to find is that your testing context is going to look less like the real world, because the real world is messy and you have controlled your laboratory context or your questions very well so that you get a good idea of whether people are happy in that moment in your study. But because you controlled so many variables so well in your study, the laboratory setting isn't much like the real world anymore. So it has less external validity. So if we think about that driving test, if we made the driving test extremely standardized, where everybody across the country had to do the same thing in the same way, scored and measured the same way, it probably would look very different from all the various chaotic driving conditions you have out in the real world. So it would have high internal validity, but it would have low external validity. On the other hand, if your driving test was just go drive out in the real world, it would have high external validity, but it would be very difficult to control any variables and figure out if any of your independent variables had an impact on your dependent variables. So there would be a lot of potential confounding variables and a lot of potential threats to internal validity. So now we're going to talk more specifically about those threats to validity. What are some ways that we could keep these problems from cropping up in our studies?